are back, and we are joined now by Hanno Hauenstein, Berlin-based independent journalist whose work has been published in Haaretz, The Intercept, The Guardian, and more. Hanno, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
So, let's start very broadly here. The nations that have been providing the most diplomatic cover for Israel and weapons, it's the US, the UK, and Germany. And I think the relationship between the US and the UK has been well established and discussed in the fact that the Great Britain colonized what is now Israel, the Palestinian territory, and then when World War II ended, the United States kind of took over as the #1 patron of the new Israeli state. But given Germany's past with Jewish people and with the Holocaust, with Nazis, this relationship does seem notable. So what is it? What are the roots of it? And what is the climate like right now within Germany surrounding Palestinian rights?
So like you said, I mean, like it's in some ways, I think the kind of like degree of sensitivity around the subject of Israel-Palestine is understandable and relatable, given that Germany has such a deep anti-Semitic past. But I would say, I mean, so the relationship to Israel and Germany is seen as one of like, Israel's security is Germany's Staatsräson, the raison d'etat, the kind of like reason of state, literally. So it's like Germany sees itself in a safeguarding position of Israel, and like also sort of argues for that from a historical perspective, like very directly. But what we've seen like in recent months, but also actually years, it's a policy that goes back longer than only this current war in Gaza and October 7th, is that like the kind of this like staunch pro-Israeli rhetoric is more and more often kind of used to really silence dissenting voices that are critical of Israel's war policies or occupation policies, and these voices can, I mean, whoever, it's most often Palestinians that are sensing that their right to protest or to criticize Israel's policies are being policed and being silenced, but it's like increasingly more often also like left-wing Jewish voices or kind of critical Israelis that are being silenced here in Germany. And yeah, the latest scandal surrounding Berlinale has been kind of like showcasing this tendency, I think. So there was, I'm not sure if you've heard, but there was the film No
Yes.
Other Land, right? That's basically like an Israeli-Palestinian co-production. I mean, the protagonists and the makers of the film are a Palestinian, Basel Adra, and an Israeli, Yuval Abraham. And they show the sort of forced displacement in Masafa Yatta in the West Bank and like the South Hebron Hills of Palestinian communities. This is what the film is about and what it showcases and how it's exacerbated ever since like October 7th and in recent months. And so the film won the Best Documentary Prize on Berlinale. And in their acceptance speech, Yuval Abraham and Basel Adra, both in their own different ways, kind of voiced critical things, which were basically at the core of the movie as well. So Yuval Abraham basically described the different, like, living experiences between himself and Basel Adra as one of apartheid, which is a term that kind of all serious human rights organizations that work on Israel-Palestine use in order to describe like the kind of, systemic discrimination against Palestinians in the West Bank. And Basel Adra basically asked Germany or implored Germany, so to speak, to kind of like stop sending weapons. Like you said earlier, Germany is one of the main suppliers of military equipment and weapons to Israel. It's actually ramped up its weapon exports ever since in the last year, ever since this war, 10 times more than before. So it's really significant. And Basel Adra basically said, you guys should stop sending weapons while my people are being slaughtered. Those were his words. And the whole thing broke off like a kind of a major scandal in the German media sphere, followed by like statements by German politicians, but also, yeah, like prominent journalists basically covering the whole thing as an anti-Semitism scandal from the get-go. So there is a generally very sort of generalizing atmosphere in Germany right now that like doesn't often differentiate not only who says what and how is it being said, but also just like kind of, you know, paints everything with one brush and yes, in effect endangers the life of people that grotesquely often are themselves either Jewish or descendants of like Holocaust survivors or Palestinians.
Yeah, we've had we covered that story, and we've had Basel on our show before. What made those comments so egregious, I think, or the outrage from German politicians, outrageous based on what the German politicians had to say, was that they accused Abraham, the Jewish Israeli filmmaker who made these comments, of anti-Semitism. The gall of German politicians to accuse a Jewish person of anti-Semitism is astounding to me. I mean, what was the reaction like within Germany to that kind of remark?
Well, honestly, it's been mostly shared, right? I mean, that's the way the whole scandal has been depicted. So like after the award ceremony, pretty much right after, the whole thing started on Twitter, but like it sparked over to like Axel Springer owned media outlets and also many other regular media outlets that are actually seen as serious. And the general headline was like anti-Semitism at the Berlinale Film Festival. So there was not a lot of differentiation going on. Kai Wegner, the mayor of Berlin, spoke of like anti-Semitism. One Bundestag member of the German Liberal Party even called to defund Berlinale, the film festival, and Claudia Roth, the federal minister of culture, that was like a particularly bizarre element of the whole scandal. She was cast as like applauding to Yuval Abraham and Basel Adra during their speech by Bild Zeitung, which is like one of the biggest German newspaper, basically in a major tabloid. And so after Bild published this like quote unquote incriminating report of seeing her clapping, a statement was published on her behalf, basically clarifying that she only clapped for Yuval Abraham, not for the Palestinian speaker.
That is astounding.
Yeah, it's people have made this joke and call it like clapartheid, but I mean the irony is obviously that like she kind of subverts the thing she says herself by like basically basically stating that she clapped only for one person and kind of undermining the thing she allegedly clapped for. So I mean the whole thing became increasingly like strange and bizarre, and there was a general lack of differentiation, I would say, and not a lot of people in Germany in general are aware of the fact that people around the world are looking at Germany and kind of like not really believing their eyes when they see Germans sort of like endangering Jews, because Yuval Abraham himself, he got like death threats after this whole scandal kind of spilled over into Israeli media as well, and he couldn't like return home quickly, and basically said on Twitter afterwards in a statement that like he believes that this is making Jews unsafe. This kind of like instrumentalizing claims of anti-Semitism for whatever reason. Is it support with an ethno-nationalist government, with a right-wing government in Israel? I think in the German context, the way these things are used is often to kind of absolve yourself of like political shame, which makes sense, but like it often translates to like outright support for a state government, whatever that government might be doing, and I don't think that's the right path to take.
Certainly. I mean, what how far back does Germany's support of Zionism go? What is the history of Germany's support for Zionism, and I guess how that is shaped by the atrocities of the Holocaust, and how German citizens reckon with their government having committed one of the greatest crimes in the history of the world.
Right. So, I mean, the current policy of Staatsräson, which no one I mean, it's really a difficult policy to explain because it's a very abstract term. It's not a law. It's more something that's really symbolically felt. But like that goes back to Angela Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany, announcing in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament in 2008, that Israel's security is Germany's reason of state, as I said before. So this is like where this kind of post-war German national identity really made Israel be part of like the core of its self-understanding. I think that's where that grew from. Germany has also historically, in many ways, one could argue that Israel's, I mean, support for Israel and for Zionism has been kind of at the core of Germany's like making amends with its own history and like being accepted within the international community. And this goes way deeper historically speaking, but this would be a longer conversation, I think. But the main thing we're speaking about, the kind of like outright support for Israel's policies, really goes back to the 2008 speech. And in recent years, I think this has very much intensified and actually been became much stronger in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating because we've covered before how, for example, in Haiti, right, when there was the Haitian Revolution and the slavery ended, reparations were paid, but it was paid by the new government of Haiti to the former slave owners, the French, for their loss of capital and their losses of business. And I'm a little bit reminded of that story when I think about Germany's support for Israel, which is that this is a bit of outsourcing, I think, the crimes of a wealthy Western power with a ton of money and prestige. Germany still has incredible prominence financially on the world stage and in industry, healthcare, etc. Weapons as well. They're the second largest weapons sellers to Israel. It feels to me like another example of reparations for an incredibly horrific, bloody crime being outsourced onto people who are not deserving of that, and that is the Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to look. It sounds reasonable what you're saying. You're more firm, I think, in the history of Haiti than I'm, but I do believe that like there is kind of an element of like a kind of a historical shortcut here that Germans. I'm German myself. I feel this historical responsibility that like I think every German should feel for the atrocity of the Holocaust. This is not something I want to deflect in any way, but I think there is kind of like a psychological, political sort of shortcut interplay here that we see more and more, that kind of support for Israel becomes this sort of like replacement or placeholder for actually thinking about what that historical responsibility could actually mean. You know, it's less, you know, how do we create a world that like that decreases anti-Semitism, racism, or ethno-nationalism, and rather kind of strengthens this type of like placeholder nationalism. But I think this one of the reasons why this kind of mindset is so baked in these days into national German identity is also that it's really pushed and cemented by several German newspapers. I think it's also really like a media crisis in which like in in which the media has German state media, not state media, but several German media outlets have made kind of like support for Israel part of their editorial line, basically. So Axel Springer, which is like the biggest publisher in Europe and like one of the biggest publisher in Germany as well, and like owns the biggest newspapers in this country, has made it actually part of their work contracts to be pro-Zionist and pro-Israel. So that I think that's really a big part of the whole story that we're looking at here.
Can you talk about the repression of pro-Palestinian protests within Germany and what's been happening there?
Yeah, so the repression of the protest was very intense. Has been very intense in the first weeks following October 7th. So basically, any type of protest had been forbidden. Now the situation has changed. After a few weeks, protests have been allowed, and people are actually regularly protesting in Berlin. But there have been quite severe regulations on like people wearing keffiyehs, people shouting things like "from the river to the sea," which has been forbidden in Germany. People wearing symbols of Palestinian identity, like the Palestinian flags, has been forbidden in schools. There were all types of different forms of repression that took place all over the city, but very much particularly in Neukölln, which is, very a lot of Palestinian refugees and people of Arab Palestinian descent live here in Neukölln. So it was very much visceral in this district, the kind of repression on not only pro-Palestinian protests, but also kind of like visible signs of Palestinian identity. And yeah, I think that has very much contributed to a sentiment of like, racial profiling and feeling disenfranchised by major German society. And the sentiment right now is that like this mixture of kind of like German anti-Semitism, completely understandable for historical reasons, but like that politicized within the Israel-Palestine context, is really coming together with a kind of like new form of like anti-migration policies that is driven out of like a kind of prejudiced view of Palestinians as sort of like prototype neo-Nazis. That's the kind of sentiment that is being built in the public sphere in Germany, and like German chancellors Olaf Scholz has addressed the issue of like Palestinians in Germany having to adapt in a Spiegel interview, in which he also said like we are going to deport on a major scale. The vice chancellor of Germany has actually called on Muslims to distance themselves from anti-Semitism, which understandable, but like he kind of cast Muslims as like sort of suspect of anti-Semitism per se.
Well, it's the complete conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.
That is quite visible in the discussions again and again, right? I mean, like it's often been conflated and mixed together, and there's not a lot of differentiation going on altogether.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Hanno. Thank you so much for shedding light on what's happening in Germany and some of the sentiment there. You can read Hanno's work in The Intercept, in Haaretz. There are two recent pieces that we will link to wherever people are listening to or watching this. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.